Nintendo won by breaking the rules Sega believed in. Sega believed speed would win the console war. Nintendo believed control would. Sega tried to win by moving faster. Nintendo won by stopping everyone else from moving at all. And that difference decided everything. Because while Sega chased the future, Nintendo quietly locked down the present. Not with better hardware, not with flashier marketing, but with rules. Strict, boring, suffocating rules. Rules Sega thought didn't matter anymore. In the early 1990s, Sega looked unstoppable. They were cool, they were loud, they were fast. Sonic wasn't just a mascot, he was a declaration of war. Speed, attitude, rebellion. Sega didn't just sell consoles, they sold a feeling. Nintendo was the opposite. Safer, slower, controlled. Parents trusted Nintendo. Teenagers rolled their eyes at it. And for a brief moment, it looked like Sega had cracked the code. Genesis sales surged. Nintendo was mocked in ads. The industry talked about Sega as the future. But Sega misunderstood one critical thing. Nintendo was never trying to win by being cool. Nintendo was trying to win by owning the system itself. Nintendo's real advantage wasn't Mario, it wasn't Zelda, it wasn't nostalgia, it was leverage. After the video game crash of the early 1980s, Nintendo learned a brutal lesson from Atari's collapse. If you don't control your ecosystem, it will destroy itself. Too many games, too little quality, no standards, no trust. Atari didn't just lose market share, they lost credibility. Nintendo rebuilt the industry by doing something deeply unpopular. They said no. Every developer needed a license, every cartridge had to be manufactured by Nintendo, every game had to be approved, limits on how many titles you could release per year, restrictions on content, control over inventory. Developers hated it. Retailers complained. Publishers felt suffocated. Sega laughed at it, because Sega believed freedom would unleash creativity. Nintendo believed freedom would unleash chaos, and Nintendo was done with chaos. Sega looked at Nintendo's system and saw weakness. Too slow, too rigid, too conservative. Sega believed innovation was the weapon that would finally end Nintendo's dominance. Faster hardware, edgier games, constant evolution. Genesis wasn't just a console, it was a moving target. And that was the problem. Sega didn't just release one platform, they released a philosophy. Move fast, upgrade often, never stand still. Genesis, then Sega CD, then 32X. Each one promised the future, each one fractured the present. Developers didn't know where to invest, consumers didn't know what to buy, retailers didn't know what would still matter next year. Nintendo watched all of this and waited. This is where the war actually shifted, not in marketing, not in hardware, but in developer psychology. Because developers don't chase excitement, they chase survival. Nintendo offered something Sega couldn't: certainty. One platform, one standard, one massive install base. If you played by the rules, you got access to millions of players. If you didn't, you were locked out completely. Nintendo didn't need developers to love them, they needed developers to depend on them. Sega tried to compete by offering freedom, lower barriers, more experimentation, faster iteration. And in the short term, it worked. Sega attracted developers who wanted flexibility, who wanted to move fast, who wanted fewer restrictions. But flexibility has a cost. It creates risk, and risk compounds quietly until it doesn't. Nintendo understood something deeply uncomfortable. Innovation doesn't scale well. Control does. You can't mass-produce chaos, you can mass-produce systems. Nintendo chose the system. Sega chose momentum. Here's where the story turns. Because Sega's strategy only works if momentum never slows. Every year had to be louder, every console had to be faster, every launch had to outdo the last. That kind of pressure breaks organizations. Nintendo didn't escalate, they absorbed. When Nintendo launched the Super Nintendo, it wasn't revolutionary, it was deliberate. Better graphics, better sound, familiar structure. No wild add-ons, no confusing upgrades, just refinement, and that refinement landed into a market Nintendo already controlled. Sega had better speed, Nintendo had better positioning, and positioning beats speed every time. Sega believed Nintendo would collapse under its own rigidity. Surely developers would rebel, surely creativity would stagnate, surely players would move on. But something unexpected happened. Nintendo became boring, and boring turned out to be powerful. Parents trusted Nintendo, retailers trusted Nintendo, developers trusted Nintendo, even if they resented them. Trust doesn't trend, it compounds. Meanwhile, Sega's complexity began to work against them. Too many SKUs, too many promises, too many directions. The audience fractured, the message blurred. Sega was no longer fighting Nintendo, they were fighting confusion. This is the moment Sega didn't notice. Nintendo wasn't reacting anymore, they were setting gravity. Developers began optimizing for Nintendo first, Sega second. Retailers prioritized Nintendo shelf space, consumers defaulted to Nintendo when uncertain. Momentum quietly shifted, not with headlines, not with hype, but with habits. Sega tried to fix the problem the only way they knew how: more speed, more innovation, more risk. But by now, every new move increased fragility instead of advantage. Nintendo didn't need to respond aggressively, they let Sega exhaust itself. The cruel irony is this: Sega wasn't wrong, they were early. Speed mattered, innovation mattered, attitude mattered. But being right too early looks identical to being wrong. Nintendo wasn't visionary, they were patient. They didn't chase the future, they waited for the future to stabilize, then controlled it. By the time Sega realized what was happening, the war was already decided. Nintendo didn't defeat Sega in a fair fight, they made the fight unfair. They turned access into a weapon, they turned rules into leverage, they turned patience into dominance. Sega kept sprinting, Nintendo stood still and let gravity do the work. Sega believed winning meant out-innovating Nintendo. Nintendo believed winning meant outlasting everyone. Those are not the same game. Innovation burns cash, longevity compounds power. Nintendo chose compounding, and that's the lesson Sega never learned. In platform wars, freedom feels powerful. Control actually is. Sega chased momentum, Nintendo built gravity, and gravity always wins in the end. Because the companies that last aren't the ones that move fastest, they're the ones that decide who's allowed to move at all.